Hello, everyone. I'm Francesca Tarocco, and I'm the director of NICHE, the new Institute Center for Environmental Humanities here at Ca' Foscari University of Venice, and I'm extremely happy to have you all here and delighted for this collaboration that started off, and I'm very grateful to Magna for pulling this off a few years ago when she was a visiting scholar here at NICHE. And we started talking about all things water and all things sustainability, polycrisis, and all the stuff that you guys also work on. So just a few words about us. We've been around for a few years now. And being in Venice and of Venice, one of the things that we decided when we started this concentration around environmental humanities, we have an MA, of course, in environmental humanities, and NICHE, the research center. We also have a doctorate in sustainability, and there's a long-standing tradition here at Venice also of scientists involved with environmental studies and economists involved with environmental studies. Buonasera, hello. So we started, when we started this probably 4 years ago, now we decided that one of our, the focus of our research would be indeed water studies and sort of blue humanities and things like that. But right from the start, again, because of Venice and being of Venice, we also thought that it would be fantastic to be cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and have strong public engagement and have strong relations also with artists and institutions here, like, of course, the Venice Biennale and other institutions that work with art and artists. So I think that your symposium is also very much in tune, and independently, of course, you have done similar work, but I urge you to be in touch with us if you don't know our work as well. We have an ongoing program of visiting scholarship, so we are very happy to host people for a month or even longer. If we share common interest, we also have many Marie Curies. We do secondments, we host Marie Curies. We have our own Marie Curies. People can apply for a Marie Curie with NICHE and be at NICHE. So I think it's nice to be at, an independent place, an independent research center. We also have our own journal, and here I will stop after this and leave the floor to the speaker. Our journal is called the Venice Journal, Lagoonscapes, the Venice Journal of Environmental Humanities, which is a double-blind, peer-reviewed journal and fully downloadable, so it's an open access one. Thank you so much, and welcome to Venice and to this beautiful room, and fantastic to have you here and to the symposium tomorrow. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Francesca, and thank you, NICHE. My name is Lee Douglas, and I am a member of TRACS and the leader for Working Group 1. And I'm here today. We're going to kind of do a double introduction for our esteemed colleague and friend, Jaime Vindel, who's our keynote for tonight. And so my introduction in part is to give some of you, you're in TRACS, so you should know what TRACS is, but TRACS is a cost network. We've been in existence now, we're in our 4th year, and it's slowly coming to an end, but it's a network that is very much committed to thinking across disciplines, but also across modes of practice and methodologies to think about the epistemological, methodological, and ethical implications of trace. We had our management committee meeting this morning. For those of you that were there, this is a bit of a repetition, but we're very much also thinking about how the project can move forward. But one of the things that is kind of our legacy project, that is in a project that's coming, I guess, to a head soon, is our book series, which is going to be with De Gruyter. It's called Spectropia, Experiments in Trace. And one of the books in the collection, the second book in the collection, is actually Jaime Vindel's Fossil Aesthetics, which is originally published in Spanish and is being kind of redone as its the first version to be in English. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to have Jaime here today to introduce his work and to continue to be in dialogue with TRACS. So I'm going to now pass things to Alberto.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lee. So I am Alberto Berzosa. I am also part of construction. I am co-leader of Working Group 3, dedicated to explore traces and climate change. I would like to start by thanking again Francesca for opening the doors of NICHE for us today. And my role now is to introduce Jaime. Jaime Bindel holds an European PhD in art history, and he is a tenured scientist of the Spanish National Research Council, where he is principal investigator of several research projects, including the most recent post-fossil culture, socio-cultural imaginaries, global warming, and energy transition. He has coordinated the Cultural Ecology section of the Independent Studies program in the Museum of Contemporary Art of Barcelona, and is the author of books such as Cultura Fósil, Arte, Cultura y Política entre la Revolución Industrial y el Calentamiento Global, or Estética Fósil, Imaginarios de la Energía y Crisis Ecosocial, for which an English version is forthcoming as in the Spectropia collection, as Lee has already mentioned. Through his work in recent years, which I have summarized in these few words, Jaime has enriched studies in the field of environmental humanities in Spain from the perspective of visual culture in an original and fruitful way, allowing many researchers to develop original and very valuable lines of research. And today he will be presenting one of his ongoing research framed within the concerns of this symposium, entitled The Dream of Water Produces Monsters. Well, it's a pleasure, Jaime, to have you here. As you know, thank you very much. Now the floor is yours.
So thank you so much for the presentation and for the invitations. I would like to say thank you to the organizers for the efforts to make possible this event. I'm going to read the conference because I think it's the best way to communicate the ideas I want to translate to you. And after that, we can discuss or return about some of the questions I'm going to put in the table. The title of the conference is The Dream of Water Produces Monsters, Enlightenment, Hydraulic Capitalism, and Imaginaries of Power in Contemporary Spain. Well, in her book, Enclosing Water, Nature and Political Economy in a Mediterranean Valley, Stefania Barca traces the processes of water privatization in the Liri Valley, located in the Italian Apennines and belonging to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Barca describes the establishment of textile and paper factories as an event that shook the valley's history, with a threefold effect on local communities. First, water privatization became instrumental to the mechanization of production processes under the goal of increasing the productivity of natural resources. Enlightened liberals created a far-reaching fiction about how communal economies negatively affected the long-term preservation of forests and farmland. Anticipating Garrett Hardin's arguments about the tragedy of the commons, they claim that the communal management of resources depleted them, following a logic of plunder wherever individuals pursue personal gain. The indiscriminate felling of trees had allegedly triggered increasing soil erosion processes that contributed to the disorder of waters, incompatible with the efficient use of river currents as the primary power source for textile and paper factories. This discourse ignored the fact that the communal economies were strongly regulated by a normative framework that safeguarded the interests of the collective, involving its members in the care of rivers and forests and promoting the long-term preservation of natural resources. The history of the Liri Valley does show that the tragedy of the commons has been, above all, an ideological discourse driving the processes of accumulation that shaped the history of industrial capitalism. The mechanization of production also entailed the mechanization of labor, subjected to a new and more intensive regime of exploitation under the control of hydraulic machines. Finally, this transformation in the economy and political ecology of the Liri Valley were accompanied by the emergence of a narrative that reshaped their perception of the relationship between nature and society. The picturesque sensibility creates the aesthetic of the economic liberalism. In depictions of the Liri Valley, such as those imagined by Raffaele Carelli during the first third of the 19th century, the river laundresses appear pleasantly integrated into a view of Isola del Liri, one of the valley's main villages and whose waterfalls power the region's new industries. Past and present, tradition and modernity thus form a natural hybrid that will reappear in the imaginaries of energy infrastructures in Italy and other southern European countries. Let us now move from the Liri Valley to the basin of the Manzanares River. The Manzanares rises in the Ventisquero de la Contesa, a spot in the Sierra de Guadarrama located near Madrid. It's just this part of the slide. Oops. After plunging down the granite rocks of La Pedriza, is this formation of very important value in geological terms that you can see here, the waters of the Manzanares are held back by the reservoir from which the photograph on the slide was taken. The dam was built in the early 20th century by the Marquis of Santillana, a member of a feudal dynasty that also owned the medieval castle of the Mendoza family. You can see also the dam here and the castle. I will return to the history of the reservoir and the castle later. After passing through the dam, the waters of the Manzanares first reached Madrid and later become a tributary of the Tagus River. From the Enlightenment to democracy, passing through Francoism, the low flow of the river has led numerous reformers and urban planners to promote public works aimed at enhance its appearance. The objective was it could resemble other examples such as the Seine in Paris or the Tiber in Rome, an expression of the sense of inferiority that has conditioned the narrative of Spanish modernity. I now return to the image featured on the poster of this conference. It is a drawing created by Lucas Constant in 1724, depicting the networks of tributaries from the Manzanares River, including the mills, diversion dams, fountains, water channels, bridges, and fulling mills located along its banks. He did so with a very specific purpose: to help resolve the disputes that, since the period of the repopulation of the region during the Reconquista against the Muslim, had arisen between the village of the Real de Manzanares and those located downstream, including the city of Madrid. The former was supported by the Marquis of Santillana, who held feudal jurisdiction over those lands. El Real de Manzanares claimed their priority right to use the waters for irrigation and livestock supply, which the village diverted through a series of canals and small reservoirs managed communally. In contrast, the court and the owners of the facilities located downstream complained that this preferential use undermined their access to the resource. Constant thus created this visual cartography as a kind of expert report. Although the trial resolution favored the Real de Manzanares, the map established a visual and an administrative instrument for territorial control that signaled the arrival of new times. With the advent of industrial modernity, the natural resources management in Madrid hinterland will progressively shift in favor of an alliance between the state and private interest, displacing the predominance of the link between feudal power and communal economies of the area. Throughout the century, Other proto-sociological instruments began to appear, such as Cardinal Lorenzana's descriptions. As was the case in Real del Manzanares, local priests had to send Lorenzana surveys reflecting aspects such as the distribution of agrarian property, the main crops, and the demographic composition of the village making up that district. The dispute between the old communal world and the new liberal world was resolved in favor of the latter, thanks, among other factors, to the disentailment processes promoted by the state since the 18th century. Although in the Spanish case, disentailment is usually associated with charged properties, in reality, it primarily affected municipal assets, including bienes de propios, wasted lands, bienes baldíos, wastelands, bienes de propios, municipal revenue lands, common lands, and mancommunal lands that constitute the livelihood of the inhabitants of regions such as the Real del Manzanares. Disentailment was subject to projects of varying political orientations. In the thinking of Enlightenment figures such as Pablo de Olavide or Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos, the demand for the privatization of land as a way to encourage its productivity was combined with a certain social sensitivity, reflected in their advocacy for a distribution of properties that will guarantee the subsistence of the peasantry. The limited scope of this land use planning, far from a genuine agrarian reform, was combined throughout the 19th century with its subordination to the payment of the public debt, a policy imposed by Manuel Godoy to cover the expenses derived from the wars with France and England. Later, this tendency would turn agrarian property into a source of speculation for debt holders, drawn for the urban bourgeoisie or the aristocratic nobility. Far from making the land more productive, on numerous occasions the acquired properties were used for activities such as hunting. In contexts such as Real del Manzanares, expropriation was particularly severe, wiping out much of the communal pastures and whole oak dehesas that had guaranteed a certain degree of autonomy for the population during previous centuries. As Manuel Valenzuela has pointed out, after the Reconquista, the area was divided into small properties known as quiñones, which by the 16th century had already led to a high population density for a mountainous region. After a demographic decline, the area was repopulated during the 18th century thanks to the reconstruction of public works, especially canals and roads, which provided a source of employment. In any case, by the end of that century, more than 60% of the population depended on the agricultural sector, which gives an idea of the impact that the sale of municipal lands had. Manzanares el Real, the administrative center, cabeza de partido of the district, was the locality that experienced this process most acutely. By 1870, after the disentailments of Mendizábal and Madoz, the municipality had lost up to 26% of its territory. Parallel to this process of disentailment of common lands, Manzanares el Real experienced a pioneering industrialization of the uses of the river's water with the establishment in 1837 of the first continued paper production mill in Spain. Using a technological innovation imported from France and England, the Madrid publisher Tomás Jordán set up a facility there to process worn clothing into paper pulp. Jordán was closely linked to the urban cycles of progressive liberalism and known for printing engravings, including Goya's self-portraits. Although mills and other facilities belonging to private owners from outside Manzanares el Real had previously been installed along the river, this was a different experiment. Due to the complexity of its production chain, which included several interconnected spaces, the technical sophistication of its machinery, and the volume of wage labor, the factory implemented the introduction of the industrial political economy into this rural sphere. During its first decades, The paper factory allowed traditional agrarian economies to coexist with part-time industrial employment. However, with the progressive privatization of communal lands, it became the main livelihood of the population of Manzanares el Real, now dispossessed of their previous means of subsistence. According to the local priest, over decades, complaints proliferated about working conditions. The documents also describe the work of the so-called pasadoras, women whose job was to tear apart the garments to facilitate pulp paper production, working 2 12-hour shifts. As Rosario Gómez Osuna has pointed out, all this led the village council to lament in 1879 that the town was the poorest in the area, noting that of the municipality's 110 inhabitants, the majority were employed by the paper mill. The paper mill was located in Manzanares el Real for 2 main reasons. First, to externalize the effects of water pollution caused by the chlorine used to bleach the paper pulp by locating the factory at a point sufficiently far from Madrid. And second, to harness the river current where it was most favorable. This industrial enterprise thus reflected the subordination of the rural environment to the needs of the city, whose publishing industry, periodicals, and state apparatuses require an ever-growing supply of paper. In fact, the mill's paper was also used for the Boletín Oficial del Estado, the official state gazette. The innovative character of the factory's technology led to its presentation at the public exhibition of the Spanish industry in 1841. Nevertheless, it faced 2 major handicaps. First, the lack of adequate infrastructure for transporting the paper, which had to be carried by mules to the nearest railway station. And second, the shortage of racks that could serve as raw material for paper manufacturing, which often have to be imported from abroad. It's interesting to note that a document from that same year, drafted by Catalan paper makers, lamented that the wealth of countries such as France allowed that hemp, cotton, or linen garments were worn for a shorter time, resulting in a greater volume of clothing available for the paper industries. In addition to decentralized policies, the political ecology of the Enlightenment was based on the construction of infrastructures such as navigation and irrigation canals, which in some cases also provide access to hydraulic currents for proto-industrial facilities such as mills or fulling houses. The most well-known case was the Canal de Castilla, which was intended to provide a route to the Cantabrian Sea for the goods produced on the Castilian plateau. The military engineer responsible for the Canal de Castilla, Carlos Lemaur, also conceived the construction of the Gasco Dam, designed to retain the waters of the Guadarrama, the river that gives its name to the mountain range near Madrid. The purpose was to divert them via a canal into the Manzanares, thereby increasing its flow. Inspired by Saint-Simon, the project intended ultimately to provide the kingdom's capital with a connection to the Atlantic. In this way, vessels departing from the court will be able to navigate first along the Manzanares, then along the Tagus and the Guadalquivir, until reaching the ocean. The canal was never completed as the dam collapsed due to a miscalculation. Today, it has the ruin appearance you can see in the slide. However, the Gasco Dam became a symbol of the new state's power capacity to intervene decisively in hydraulic policies. During the 19th century, these hydraulic policies was expanded for several reasons. First, the demographic growth of the city of Madrid required ensuring a steady domestic water supply through canals that, like the Canal de Isabel II, brought water from the mountains. As part of this emerging era, for the last 2 decades of the century, the waters of the Manzanares found multiple new uses, linked to the intensification of irrigation, the application of water currents in industry, the pioneering production of electricity, and their integration into reforestation policies to combat the severe climatic conditions of Madrid, extremely hot summers and cold winters. From this period date, the proposals of engineers such as Gabriel Faurá, who, with the approval of Isaac Peral, conceived a daring infrastructure project consisting of a system of canals and small dams for irrigation and hydroelectric production, diverting the waters of the Duero River through 2 large tunnels in the Sistema Central mountain range. Although the plan was never carried out, one of its branches, one of the projected branches, discharged the Duero waters into the Manzanares Grajal Dam, located halfway between the upper basin of the river and Madrid. Another project of the period was conceived by Celedonio Rodríguez, head of Parks, Garden and Trees of the Madrid City Council, who designed a comprehensive plan for the Manzanares that included the construction of reservoirs, windbreak forests located to seal the city from mountain winds, and the beautification of the river as it passed through the capital. Rodríguez's proposal also included the recovery of the Gasco Dam for the application of hydraulic power to industry, which, according to his calculations, was cheaper and more efficient than the supply by coal. As happened in pre- and post-Risorgimento Italy, the Imaginaries of Spanish Regeneracionismo regarded water as both a material and symbolic element of industrial progress. The hydraulic policies of liberalism play a fundamental role in shaping its energy matrix and in the productive redemption of the national geography, especially after the loss of the overseas colonies and in the face of the threats of drought and desertification. Paradoxically, the use of the waters of the Manzanares within the framework of modern hydraulic policies was carried out by a relative unexpected actor, Joaquín de Arteaga y Echagüe, the 17th Marquis of Santillana. In a far-reaching Lampedusian operation, this figure enabled the old feudal lord of El Real de Manzanares to adapt to the new times, replacing his jurisdictional privilege over the declining communal economies with the acquisition of the land on which the Santillana Reservoir is located. The Manzanares El Real Reservoir, which still bears the name of the Marquis, was built in 1907 through the creation of the Santillana Hydraulic Society. The dam flooded a significant portion of the pastures and the dehesas that had not yet been affected by the disinterment processes suffered by the village, thus finally suffocating the autonomy of the region's farmers and ranchers. As if that were not enough, a year later, the Marquis also acquired ownership of the continuous paper mill, only to shut it down 3 years later, leaving the workers who depended on it unemployed. The reason for this decision was the incompatibility between the use of chlorine as a bleaching agent for paper pulp and the water quality of the reservoir. In addition to being used for hydroelectric production for the lighting of Madrid and other villages, reservoir water was intended primarily for domestic consumption in the northern area of the capital and the royal palace. The social effects of this decision were denounced by chronicles of the time, such as Juan Meliá, one of the pioneers of hiking and climbing in the Sierra del Guadarrama. A stepson of Pablo Iglesias, the founder of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, the PSOE, a member of the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, a key institution for the Regeneracionismo project, Meliá described in his book Andanzas Castellanas, Castilian Adventures, how the, I quote, the Santillana Dam, as it expanded, invaded fields and completely flooded them, retaining all the water of the Manzanares River and creating a lagoon with many meters of perimeter, end of quote. This fact, combined with the closure of the paper factory, led Meliá during one of his visits to Manzanares to describe the village as a dying village. Beyond its metaphorical component, this statement reflected a real process. According to the census of the time, The successive closures of the dam and the factory caused the village population to fall from 540 to 122 inhabitants between 1910 and 1920. The Marquis of Santillana's hydraulic project also carried a strong symbolic dimension. In a frequently cited article, Maria Caica described dams as temples of modernity. Caica specifically reflected on the construction of the Marathon Dam near Athens during the 20s. Faced with the demographic growth of the new capital of modern Greece, Hadrian's ancient aqueduct could no longer supply the city with water. It became necessary to build a dam in a place as historically charged as Marathon. Located at a distance from Athens that is still covered today in the athletic race, Marathon evoked the 5th century before Christ battle in which the Greeks had defeated the Persians. As part of the invention of a modern nation, Greece, which was meant to embody the essence of the West, Marathon symbolized the victory of civilization over barbarism. This interpretation deliberately overlooked the recent and Eastern history of the Greek people, who up until the threshold of the 20th century had been more numerous in cities of the Ottoman Peninsula, such as Constantinople or Smyrna, than in Athens, still dotted with mosques and Orthodox churches. The reconstruction of the Greek capital as a temple of classical antiquity went hand in hand with the creation of a dam that established a direct link with that historical fiction through two concrete elements. First, the material chosen for the dam wall, marble quarried from the surrounding area. Second, the placement of an exact neoclassic replica of the treasury of the Athenians at the foot of the dam. In this way, hydraulic infrastructures conciliated the reinvention of history and the projection of progress. This narrative was reinforced through milestones such as the construction of a fountain in the center of classical Athens, with a jet that sends Marathon's water soaring into the sky. This last image immediately recalls the fountain installed in the center of Madrid to celebrate the arrival of water from the Lozoya River via the canal de Isabel II, immortalized in the painting by Eugenio Lucas Velázquez that I'm showing on the slide. Is this painting here. However, to return to our causes or our case of study, I am interested in drawing a series of parallels between Caica's discussion on the Marathon Dam and the way in which the Marquis of Santillana conceived the dam that held back the waters of the Manzanares. The first striking point is their geographical proximity to their respective urban centers. In Marathon is 42 kilometers from Athens, Manzanares el Real lies about 46 kilometers from Madrid. This is a sufficient distance to transform the hinterland of the modern city without directly impacting its immediate periphery. Nevertheless, I wish to emphasize the analogous symbolic and narrative traits in the dam's construction. To embellish the structure in 1914, barely 7 years after the reservoir's closure, the Marquis commissioned Vicente Lampérez, an architect inspired by the work of Viollet-le-Duc. This is the restoration of the dam in Manzanares. Lampérez chose as his model the late Gothic and Proto-Renaissance architectural style used in the 15th century by Juan Guas to build the castle of Manzanares el Real. You can see here an aspect of the castle that is imitated in the symbolic operation in the dam by Lampérez. And this is the castle that is just in front of the dam that is closing here the reservoir. Situated at the point where the Manzanares River flows into the reservoir, on the opposite side from the dam, the castle had historically been occupied by the Marquis of Santillana and the Dukes of the Infantado. Land Pérez was simultaneously entrusted by the Marquis with restoring the castle. Beyond historicist taste, the architect's choice established a genealogical line connecting past and present. The use of granite as main material for the building, the decoration of the spheres and moldings, along with the structures of gallery and maculations, created a sense of continuity between the feudal glories of the Santillana family during the post-Reconquista and Christian expansion and their Lampedusian transformation into champions of hydraulic capitalism and infrastructural modernization of the nation. The construction of the reservoir by the Marquis de Santillana inaugurated a practice that would have long-lasting influence in the Spanish hydraulic modernity of the 20th century. The authoritarian articulation between the modernizing impulse of public authorities and the oligopolistic interests of the private sector would reach its peak during the Franquism. If you look at the lower left part of this slide, here, you will notice that the dam built by the Marquis de Santillana appears submerged beneath the waters of the current reservoir. The reason was explained by the June 21, 1971 edition of Nodo, the dictatorship newsreel whose productions were mandatory in cinemas and other public spaces. The Franco regime had decided to build a new dam a few meters downstream from the original one, thus substantially increasing the number of cubic meters of water the reservoir could hold. The project was justified by a discourse with deep roots in Spanish hydraulic modernity. Echoing the post-colonial ecological anxiety I mentioned, the laws of the colonies made it imperative to make the most of the natural resources of the national territory, particularly every single drop of water. This plan, first supported by progressive thinkers of the 19th century such as Ricardo Macías Picabea, and recently revived by the far-right party Vox to criticize the demolition of the small wells by Spain's Ministry for the Ecological Transition, found its expression in the Nodo newsreel dedicated to the expansion of the Santillana Reservoir. There, the announcer stated that the project will allow for, I quote, the full use of the waters of the Manzanares River. The entire flow of the Manzanares River will be collected for the supply of Madrid. In parallel with the construction of this second dam, and inspired by the environmental policies of Italian fascism, the dictatorship promoted a reforestation plan for the reservoir surrounding. The Italian Militia Forestale had instilled in the Spanish Falange the awareness of the need to connect the hydraulic policy of building large reservoirs with the forestry policy of repopulating mountain areas. Both help contain soil erosion processes that carry sediments to the bottom of reservoirs, compromising their viability as water suppliers or hydroelectric producers. This combination of forestry policy and hydraulic policy was made explicit in the title of Francisco Centol's documentary El Bosque y el Agua, The Forest and the Water. One of the sequences of the documentary was set around the Santillana Reservoir and focused on fumigation processes against pests affecting the reforestation of the Pedriza area, a granite formation of great geological value. As a consequence of the disentamment processes I described earlier, the horn oak and cork oaks that once made up the original forest of this mountainous area had become the last natural resources available for the population, expelled from the pastures of the valley. One of the trails that enter this area is called, until nowadays, De los Carboneros, Charcoal Makers Trail, because until the 50s, charcoal production continued to be a common practice. This helps explain why, when Juan Meliá and other hikers of the Institución Libre de Enseñanza venture into the Pedriza, they call it the Nanga Parbat of the Sierra del Guadarrama. Nanga Parbat, the 19th highest mountain in the world, means naked mountain in Urdu and Hindi. In contrast with the process of deforestation and the harsh realities of past centuries, Zentol's film praised the forestry policy of Franquism, which in the case of the Pedriza introduced fast-growing and highly flammable species such as pines and Arizona cypresses. Against what is portrayed as the abandonment of forests and their productive potential by 19th century liberalism, Franquism presented itself as the custodian of rural Spain's values, a narrative that has also been recently revived by the far right in response to the wildfires that have ravaged the country during the summer. Stressing the post-colonial anxiety I mentioned before, the voiceover in El Bosque y el Agua was superimposed over an image of lumberjacks at logging sites. Fascist environmental policy was transformed into a kind of autarkic psalm against the potential disappearance of the fatherland. I quote, "Repopulate the mountains and you will prevent the national territory from being lost, the soil of the homeland from being reduced." On the site that once housed the ruins of the continuous paper mill, now stands a residential development called Lago de Santillana, Lake Santillana. This represents a double operation of memory erasure. On the one hand, there is the strictly physical. These buildings, constructed as second homes for Madrid residents during the transition from dictatorship to democracy, were erected on top of the factory's architectural remains, making both their archaeological study and public recognition difficult. You can see here the current aspect of the site where were the ruins of the paper continuous production factory. On the other hand, the name of the development, Lago Santillana, Lake Santillana, reflects the process of naturalizing the environmental setting of Manzanares el Real. Lake Santillana alludes to the Santillana Reservoir, whose socioecological history, as well as its connection to the formation of Spain's hydraulic capitalism oligopolies, is erased. The reservoir comes to be seen as a natural component of the landscape, prompting a resignification that has taken root in the speech of local residents, who usually refer to the lake as one of the features that make life in the village attractive. For its part, the village council of Manzanares el Real, despite being governed by a progressive coalition, continues to praise the existence of a biodiversity sanctuary in the lake reservoir, a stopover for migratory waterfowl. The website presents it as one of the area's tourist attractions, thanking the Marquis of Santillana for having endowed the village with such a privileged setting. It described the undertaking of the Duke of the Infantado as follows: a long creative process for a noble and ambitious supply venture. Now it is one of the favorite places for nesting, migration, and observation. End of quote. This is, incidentally, the very same council that is currently engaged in a legal dispute with the Marquis' heir, who just a few months ago took away from the municipality two spaces as symbolic as the village children playground and the castle itself, whose upkeep had been publicly funded for decades. The news item published in El País included one of the testimonies of the village residents. "It feels like the Middle Age," said this citizen, as if Spanish modernity did not present lines of continuity with that historical period. I am coming to a close. In a recent novel, significantly titled Paisaje Nacional, National Landscape, Millán Rivas recounts the spectral story of a Francoist colonization village occupied by anarchist activists. In one of the novel's chapters, the protagonists climbed a hill from which they perceived what at first sight they identify as a lake. Immediately afterwards, they speculate that this is in fact not a natural lake, but maybe an artificial reservoir, in which they recognize the intervention of the state power and engineers upon the landscape. In line with what I have said about the Manzanares Reservoir, they come to view this apparent lake as a gravestone over the memory of the communal uses of the territory. Up to this point, the novel seems to incorporate the critical gaze that the environmental movement has cast upon the hydraulic policies of Spanish modernity, a gaze that could be traced back to the period of the late Franquism and the transition to democracy, when voices such as Mario Gaviria or José Manuel Naredo denounced the convergence between the authoritarianism of political power and the dispossession of natural resources. The sacrifice of rural areas will be a consequence of the internal colonialism that shaped the Spanish state's relationship with its own territory. This critique during the 19th, inspired a new water culture based on social and environmental sustainability criteria, which has grounded the politics of memory surrounding the uses of water by hydraulic capitalism. However, the most striking aspect of Rivas' narrative comes next. As the character approach the water infrastructure, they reveal to the reader that what they perceive from the hill is neither a lake nor a reservoir, but a solar panel installation. In the lines that follow, the large-scale solar park is first identified with a dead camp whose technological modernity will seem to update the forgetting of the region's communal economies, only to suddenly acquire an utopian dimension that turns it into a haven for hawks and rabbits, gladly accepting that, I quote, "Since this land is the land of the sun, this field is an energy installation." End of quote. Rivas' narrative highlights the tensions running through Spanish environmentalism today, sharply divided between those who see in renewable infrastructures a continuation of past practices of plunder, and those who stress the uniqueness they represent from both a historical and a future-oriented perspective. Historical in the sense that, for the first time in industrial modernity, Spain can base its energy developments on an abundant primary energy source, as opposed to water, as a scarce resource in many areas of the country, or fossil fuels, since the national soil contains low-quality coal and insignificant oil deposits. Setting aside the problems related to the minerals and rare earths required by wind turbines and photovoltaic panels, this is an objectively unprecedented situation, one that should make us cautious when tracing abusive analogies with the past. The rollout of the energy transition, although it has not dismantled the inherited oligopolistic structures, is providing Spain with a competitive advantage which, thanks to cheap energy production, partially explains its current economic resilience compared to other Western countries. As for the future perspective, this uniqueness relates to the challenge posed by climate emergency, which requires reconciling memory politics regarding the negative effects of the modern energy infrastructures with the need to carry out as rapid as possible a transition toward a post-fossil energy mix. Looking to the past, as I have proposed in this talk, allow us to confront the blindness that pervades the techno-optimistic position about the ecosocial impacts of energy infrastructures. But looking toward the future becomes equally relevant for practicing a sort of critique of the critique to reconfigure the environmental memory politics of the last decades. Those politics are inherited from a specific period, that of environmentalism of Spain's transition to democracy, with an extremely important legacy to construct a transversal political alliance in the present, but also with a theoretical framework not always useful when the aim is not to combat the disappearance of human rural communities, but rather to ensuring the ecological viability of a species against the fossil and fossil capitalism. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jaime. We have actually some time for questions, but I'm going to start by posing a question, and then maybe everyone can kind of gather their thoughts. And if there's other questions from the room, we have a mic that's going to allow us to do that. So this was a fantastic talk, and what I found really interesting was in part the different ways in which you're bringing together traces, so documents, images, reports, maps, paintings, and even film to describe the roles of rivers, but also waterways and hydraulic kind of infrastructures in Spain, to talk about how this perhaps informs the present. So I guess my question is, like, what can we learn from these different traces, and how does this inform your own kind of critical proposals in our contemporary context of climate crisis and the transition to renewable energy?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I don't know if I can answer the question properly, but I'm going to try to say something. For me, the interesting question is to try to trace the contradictions and the tensions that occurs in the periods of transition. For example, between the old communal world and the liberal world. Because sometimes I think that the ecological critics idealize in some way the old communal world, and I had tried to show how this communal world has also a dependence on the feudal world, you know? And how with the modernization of the hydraulic politics in Spain, someone like the Marquis de Santillana has converted himself in a kind of promoter of the hydraulic capitalism in a modern sense, no? And I think that we have to take this same gaze about the relationship between the ecological, critical, the environmental movement during the Franquism and nowadays, because I think that we are confronting new elements that were not presented in the Franquism period. For example, with Alberto Berzosa, we had to write in a text, a paper about a film of the Cooperativa de Cinema Alternatiu. It's a collective from the Catalonian space that during the transition produced a documentary called Les Energías, the energies. And in that documentary, there is a reflection on the oligopoly character of the nuclear and fossil energy in Spain and in the world. But the alternative model that proposed the documentary is a kind of libertarian use of the renewable energies, like wind turbines and so on. I think that this is not enough for us. We need another kind of transition to renewable energy, and we need also to recover the role of the state in this transition. And this is something that is not in this documentary, where even the word climate is not being presented, you know? So we are in a completely different context, and sometimes I feel that the environmental movement in Spain has problems to deal with the uniqueness of the moment we are living.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Do we have any questions from the floor? Okay, so we're going to take Bajanur, and then I think that was Magda. Was that your hand? Yeah?
Hi. I have a project with Madrid Alcacon, but I'm not so aware of the hinterland, so to say. But I'm working also within the framework of Lower Austria, where water has a priority historically at the Danube. And I'm working in a village where they did everything with the water energy, so to say, 100 years ago. But nowadays, like in Spain, everything is state control. And we are trying to support energy communities there who are grassroots. I wonder how the landscape is there, because you mentioned there are still the villages and the communities. Is there any energy to come together and regain power?
Thank you. In fact, I'm from Alcorcón, but I'm living now in Manzanares del Real, and there is, for example, an energy community of production of renewable energy from solar panels and so on. But most of the people comes from Madrid, or is not from the village, you know. So it's not, there is not a continuity with the communal uses of the resources in the past. Is another configuration. Yeah.
Thank you for a lovely talk. I have a question. I mean, I'm quite inspired by the last sentence on this quote. This field is an energy installation. So I really like it because it kind of creates this notion of landscape as an energy assemblage. And from, I think what you're arguing is that historically this energy installation, this assemblage, was a kind of combination of this nation-building, post-colonial autarky project, plus this kind of very weird rendering of heritage. So in Greece you had a kind of, you know, fake temple and etc. I wanted to, maybe if you could reflect on, in the current conjuncture, where the dam is transformed into a solar panel field, what is the assemblage of this energy installation? What kind of heritages are currently evoked? What kind of stories? Because I don't think, maybe it is nationalism again, because we are in this, you know, Nietzschean eternal return of nationalism, or maybe that's something else. Maybe, yeah. So what kind of discourses, what kind of things come together into this new conjuncture of energy installation?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I have not a very clear answer, but for example, there is this one part of the environmental movement in Spain that, in some sense, is heir of this framework of the late Franquism and the transition to democracy. Now, for example, highlight the continuity between the dam reservoirs and the mega structures of solar panels in Spain. And I think it's politically very questionable, this position, because, for example, one fact is that far right support the construction of dams and criticize the current government for the destruction of small dams, and at the same time doesn't support the solar panels, the renewable energy. So I think that they are, the critic is correct in the sense that the way in which the transition to renewables energies in Spain is taking place has an oligopolistic component that is very clear, is unquestionable. But at the same time, I think that we have to explore the way in which, from the public institutions, have to support and to improve a better transition to renewable energy, where the role of the state is unquestionable from my point of view. And for example, in a conference that we have in June in Barcelona, we have discussed about some installations of solar panels that are situated over the waters of the reservoirs in some spaces of Portugal and Spain. In some way, you can interpret this image as a kind of continuity with the politics of the hydraulic capitalism in the past, but at the same time, you can see this same image as a kind of utopian component of the need of a massive transition to renewable energy. So I think that in this dialectic between the oligopolistic component of the transition and the possibilities that are open for a new kind of relationship between this southern nation of Europe and the energy process of industrialization, we have to explore this contradiction, but not with a reactionary position that sometimes is the same that the far right, or even the same that the fossil capitalism that criticize the solar panels and the wind turbines.
Yep.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I had just a very quick political conceptual question for you. So in contemporary eco-socialist, eco-Marxist discourse, it's a very popular idea that there are no neutral technologies and therefore there are no neutral sources of energy. And one of the claims is that renewable energy, because it's circular and it's infinite in some ways compared to coal and fossil energy, it's inherently, or at least has a strong tendency to be anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist, and so on. But if we look at the history of hydropower, and I think your presentation also shows this, it's not necessarily true that renewable energy is incompatible with authoritarianism, capitalism, and dictatorship. So would you say that the history of hydropower offers us a kind of a cautionary tale in how we approach renewable energy today, and maybe shows that we have to not necessarily curb our enthusiasm in our approach to renewables, but to think the political implications of energy sources much more thoroughly, rather than just inherently assuming that one source of energy will have in itself political implications that will be positive. Thank you.
I think there is not an intrinsic progressive value in the wind turbines or in the solar panels. I think that you can explore the possibilities of these kind of technologies, but this is a political dispute. This is very, very clear. Right? And but the question is, you can trace many lines of continuity between the hydropolitics of dam reservoirs and so on. For example, Iberdrola and private enterprise was very implicated in the construction of this kind of dams before and during and after the Franquism. And at the same time, Iberdrola is one of the actors more implicated in the current transition to renewables energies in Spain. But at the same time, today there is a news in the newspaper about how Trump is prohibiting the installation of wind turbines of Iberdrola in the coast of, I don't know, California, maybe. So this is the game. This is the game, and how come to intervene in this process from a progressive and emancipatory perspective. I think we have not a very clear plan from an eco-socialist or eco-Marxist perspective about how to intervene in a pragmatic way in this kind of contradiction of our time. And in Spain now the debate in the circles of the environmental movement are very sharp. By this tension between a gaze that is literally her of the ideas of the environmental movement from Franquism and the transition, and this other position more progressive that has many problems also. For example, you had to deal with this contradiction. Are you going to support Iberdrola because is supporting the energy transition to renewables, or you had to impulse the possibility that a public enterprise impulse this kind of transformation. But it's a open process that you have to deal with.
I'm just going to also, I think this is also really interesting because earlier today we were talking a lot about the importance of thinking across disciplines. So like for me, what's so interesting about your work, Jaime, is that it's definitely informed by kind of historiography, history, art history, visual cultures, and yet you're also engaged in trying to understand the complexity of ecological movements today, and how that also connects. I know we have a lot of anthropologists in the room, people that are doing ethnography. So it's also interesting how you can think about the complexities of this, both historically, but in our contemporary moment. So again, not a question, just a comment, and then, yeah.
Yes. Speaking of cross-disciplinarity, thank you for the talk, first of all. On the cross-disciplinarity side, I was led craving about your definition of capitalism, because from what I've heard, most of the examples, they range from a totalitarian kingdom to a totalitarian regime, but I don't see any capitalism in there. Quite the contrary. If we take Francoism or fascism, they were actively against the plutocracies, so global capitalism. These were state intervention actively made outside of the capitalist regime. So this leaves me wondering, what is capitalism for you? Because when it comes to the management and the use of public resources, for instance, we tend to associate it in economics with the movement of privatizations of the last decades of the 20th century. This is when capitalism enters the management of water, for instance, first in the UK and later in the rest of Europe and the world. This is when we see the emergence and the expansions of global private corporations profiting out of the exploitation of public resources, which properly said is capitalism. So is it, this doesn't seem to be what you intend, so I was wondering what your definition of capitalism would be.
I have not a definition of capitalism, but I don't agree with you in the sense that I think that always capitalism is a regulated system. It's not a pure economical system, never. And I had to try to show how the hydraulic capitalism was conformed in a specific geography like Spain during the last 3 centuries, taking the case of the Manzanares basin. This is my purpose, and I not agree with you about the question of the state. It's absolutely true that the Franquism has this autarkic component, but it is not an anti-capitalist regime. No.
Copied it from fascism. They called the large global corporations plutocracies, and they would they propose to be in the middle, especially in the use of public resources. Plus, I agree, it's always regulated, but you have something to regulate. If you don't have a privately owned by the capital enterprise, there's nothing to regulate. It's hard to speak of capitalism without private enterprise and private capital.
The most important oligopolies, for example, in the energy sector in Spain, were consolidated during the Franquism.
So I want to say something positive about interdisciplinary working in different like groups, environments. So I have some example from Poland and about the Vistula River. And I think that in order to achieve more in terms of river renaturization, we need to appeal to cooperation, with artists, also with scientists, with activists, to develop shared directions for positive change. Well, we live in quite interesting times today, so this Vistula River example, it's it's coming from 70s, because in the largest river in Poland, there was a huge dam built, which was supposed to serve for about 10 years, and unfortunately it still stands. And it's falling apart today. And it was a utopian idea of the communist government in the People's Republic of Poland. And unfortunately, when the dam was built, more than 90% of migratory fish species disappeared forever from that time. And in 2016, the right-wing Polish government revived their terrible project, wanting to build another dam under pretext of creating a new hydroelectric power plant, which in reality would not generate much energy. Certainly it's not also a green energy. The broader plan was actually that cascade damming of the Vistula to make it possible to transport coal and spread it to the world. But today Vistula is a shallow river, and today, for example, in Warsaw, the gauges sometimes shows as a little, like today, it shows as a 5 centimeter of the water, so it's really shallow, and especially in the summer. And then in 2016, hydrologists from several organizations and lawyers for nature decided to start collaborating with artists so that the visual language could reach a wider audience. The dam construction project did not receive environmental approval. So sometimes I think, and I hope that some good can be done for nature, like in disciplinary.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Did you want to? So, also in the spirit of your comment, which is about also sharing and talking about the work that we're all doing. We are actually going to close, but unofficially, we can all, wait, hold on, I have very specific instructions from Magda, so give me 1 second. We can all meet at the Campo San Steen to have informal spritzes and to keep getting to know each other and discussing our work. So I think that is all. Thank you so much, Jaime, for a fantastic talk.